We are live. What's going on, ballers? It's Jack and John back for the 10th Draft Man Standing. This is exciting, John. We've made it for 10 episodes here. 6:30 slot on Tuesdays. Every Tuesday, we've been very consistent.
Yeah, we've done a pretty good job, I'd say.
And getting in this NBA and NFL draft talk each Tuesday. Last week we had Blake join us. We'll see if anyone joins us this week. But for this week, the focus is definitely going to be back on the NBA side. Last week, we shifted to the NFL side, and I think next week we'll get back into that balance. But with March Madness coming this weekend, I figured we got to talk NBA draft prospects in the bracket. So without further ado, I picked out 4 guys just a couple hours ago. One guy from each premier 3 and D type players, I think, and has the floor of someone like a Trevor Ariza, but I think potential is something that people don't give him enough credit for, and I think Bridges has that potential to be one of these elite 3 and D wings, kind of like Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, could make that type of ascension.
Now, Jack, Bleacher Report recently had an article talking about Mikal Bridges and comparing him to, or saying he could one day be Kawhi Leonard. I know you just mentioned Kawhi. You think that's a reasonable expectation going forward as a absolute ceiling?
As the ceiling, I do see it, and the reason is because as a freshman, and I understand Villanova is one of the few teams left in college basketball where you come in as a freshman and you actually have to earn your minutes. It's wild. It's crazy. They don't just bring in...
It's prehistoric.
Yeah, prehistoric. Thank you, John. And, so Bridges came in. His freshman year was a defensive juggernaut, quite frankly, and immediately put his stamp on the game. Didn't contribute much on offense, but was a key contributor off the bench for a national championship team. Fast forward 2 years later, as a junior, he is their best player. I know Jalen Brunson gets all the pub for National Player of the Year, but Bridges is their best player. And, it's more than anything to me, John, it's the improvement from year to year that says to me he could have the Kawhi Leonard potential, because that is the same quality you saw in Kawhi Leonard as he went through his NBA progression, but also in his 2 years at San Diego State.
Now, Bridges is going to be 22 by the time the NBA next season rolls around. Do you think that's something teams are looking at, or they're not too concerned about it?
No, absolutely, John. It is something that teams are concerned with. And I don't know if concerned is the right word, but I think it's going to be the reason why teams take a guy who's 18, 19 years old, 20 years old, freshman, because they think they have a higher ceiling than Bridges. And while that may be true, they're also much further away. And so it's going to be the reason why Bridges doesn't go as high as I think he should. But it is definitely a valid reason. I just think that when you see someone progress the way Bridges has, it shouldn't be as much of a concern as it is. But moving on to the last 2 teams here, the last 2 number 1 seeds, Xavier and Kansas. For Xavier, the guy you got to look at is Trayvon Blewett, the 3-point marksman scorer for Xavier, who can get it going in a hurry, has the potential to hit 5 to 8 threes in a game, and is just a phenomenal scorer. And Devontae Graham he's my favorite player in college basketball, especially someone not on Duke. But Graham, a guy who initially was going to go to not Towson, but another a smaller school who I'm blanking on the name right now, and ended up Appalachian State. There it is, Appalachian State, and ended up blowing up at a tournament. Kansas sees him. They recruit him to come in, and he ends up being the sidekick to Frank Mason first 3 years on campus at Kansas. And this year there was many questions about the Kansas team. How good would they be? Could they win another Big Ten regular season title? And Graham carried the team to another title. First year really playing with a 4-out system at Kansas, but if you watched his last game against West Virginia, it was all you need to know about Devontae Graham. Double-digit assists, scoring timely buckets at the end of the game, and playing good defense, even if he doesn't have great size at 6'1" or 6'2".
So Graham here, another one of the I hate to say advanced age guys, but he really is at 23. Do you think he's someone who is going to be more of a rotational player, a role player throughout his NBA career, or someone who can turn into a starter even though he is a little older?
Yeah, I do see Graham Moore as a role player, a guy who is just a very smart, intelligent basketball player who you'd like to come in and be your backup point guard or your third point guard, whatever it is. Just because of his headiness as a basketball player, he's going to be in the right spots. And so therefore, he's not going to be a guy who's a first-round pick, I think. But as a second-round pick, a guy who you bring in, we've seen recent examples of players like this when you look across the NBA. Guys like Fred VanVleet, TJ McConnell come to mind, who are smaller point guards. Even my guy Quinn Cook he's worked his way onto the Warriors roster as a two-way guy. But these are the type of guys who I think are constantly undervalued, similarly to Mikal Bridges as a 3-and-D guy who you need on your team, but because they're not star-level scorers, they tend to fall through the cracks. But John, so let's keep it going with some intriguing matchups, I think, throughout the tournament. So, for one, I think the first-round matchup, now this should be circled on everyone's calendars here, South Dakota State versus Ohio State. Now, face value, you have a 5-12 matchup, so number one thing is one of these 12 seeds is going to win. So just from an entertainment value, there's a 25% chance South Dakota State wins. So just from that standpoint, it's an interesting game. But then, you look at the top players on both teams, both guys who eventually are going to be in the NBA draft. And you look at Keita Bates-Diop for Ohio State, averaging 19 points, 9 rebounds a game. And then the flip side, Mike Daum, the 3-year player for South Dakota State, who's just been a beast ever since he stepped on campus there, averaging 24 and 10 this year. So a great matchup of 4 men who can space the floor, knock down jumpers, and are just great scorers, but also can do a bit more than that. Daum is a very good passer as well. So that's a very intriguing matchup to keep your eyes on.
And really, 2 of the 5-12 matchups here, Clemson, New Mexico State, and Ohio State, South Dakota State, both of those 12s, if I'm not mistaken, are pretty high-ranking offensive juggernauts. So that could definitely be a big upset watch. As we know, 5-12 is already a big upset watch.
Yeah, and the New Mexico State game especially over Clemson is one I have my eyes on, especially with the injuries that Clemson's had, losing Dante Grantham, one of their best players a few weeks back. And as John said, New Mexico State is a very talented team, one that should not be overlooked. But moving on, there's a couple of players who I think are just worthy of watching because, quite frankly, they have a chance to do something special. And we got 3 point guards here. The first point guard is Rob Gray from Houston. He's in the West. They're in the West region. They're going to be playing San Diego State, but after that, they beat them. They're going to play the very hot Michigan team, the Michigan Wolverines, and I think Rob Gray is a very realistic chance to kind of go on a little Kemba Walker-ish run for Houston. But the same could be said for Trae Young in Oklahoma, who definitely have new life after making a tournament. And most people didn't think they were going to make it, but they have a chance to beat a Rhode Island team that also kind of limped their way into the tournament. And lastly, Colin Sexton, the Bulldog for Alabama. They have a first-round matchup with Virginia Tech. Very winnable game, but I think Buzz Williams will have those guys ready for Sexton. So it's going to be a very interesting matchup where you have more of a complete team, I think, in Virginia Tech versus Alabama. But one thing to keep an eye out in that Alabama game is whether their big man Dante Hall will be available. He's been fantastic for Alabama throughout the season, but he had a nasty concussion in the SEC tournament. And if he's not ready to go, I think it puts a lot of pressure on Sexton to really do everything on really both ends of the court. And I think that'll be too much for him in the opening round.
Yeah, I think looking at that 8-9 matchup there with Virginia Tech and Alabama is definitely an interesting one. Jack, do you think that if Sexton is the only one that's going to be really available, the only difference maker for Alabama. Do you think he's going to be able to get through Buzz Williams' defense enough to bring the game home and win it?
Yeah, exactly, John. And, ultimately to me, 5 days for Buzz Williams to prepare his squad. I know they don't have great size, but they are just always competitive, always a good defensive team. And I think Sexton's going to have trouble. And again, it's not like, going back to Dante Hall, it's not like Dante Hall creates his own shot, but what he's able to do as a rim runner and a rim protector just takes a lot of pressure off of everyone else and just the amount of tension he draws. So without him, I think, again, puts too much pressure on Sexton in that matchup.
All right, now another one here I'm pretty interested in is the first four with, say, Bonaventure and UCLA.
Yes, John.
UCLA,
exactly.
I think they're pretty underrated this year. Obviously, they don't have the big names like they had last year with Lonzo and TJ Leaf and some of the other guys there. But I think they have a really good chance to beat, say, Bonaventure. And I think going in and playing a Florida team that is a solid team, but I don't think they're a standout necessarily. I think I could see UCLA upsetting Florida and, moving on to play Texas Tech or, SF Austin if they're able to pull off another upset and maybe make a little mini run there.
No, John, absolutely. That's exactly where I was going to go next, actually. I think, I like to chunk the brackets into subregions, right? And
right.
In that subsection, the bottom half of the East region, I think Aaron Holiday is the best player in that region. And
right.
in college basketball, if you have the best player, you can win a lot of games. And the way he's been playing down the stretch for UCLA has been phenomenal. He's put himself into the back half of the first round. It wouldn't surprise me, in all honesty, if he ends up going late teens at this point. His stock has moved so high. But as John said, it wouldn't be surprising if he's able to do that. It's going to take a big effort, though, from Mr. Holiday to beat Florida, who just has a number of shooters they can space the floor with. And with Chiozza and Hudson and Kayvon Allen, they just have so many different guys that it's gonna take a big effort from Holiday. But I do agree, John. They definitely have the potential to go on a run there.
Yeah, I definitely agree there. I guess another matchup here that I'm looking at is my Miami Hurricanes and Loyola Chicago. Miami this year, I've been down on them. I don't think they've been all that great. I think as a 6th seed, I think that's about fair. They're really inconsistent. They can win some games by, 20 points. They can lose some games by, 5-10 that they should be winning by 5 or 10. So Miami, I think going up and playing this Loyola team that has a great defense that likes to slow the game down, and really that's where Miami struggles. They're more of an up and down, full court type team. They're not a great passing team. They're a team that likes to do a lot of isolation, a lot of pick and rolls, and that's about it. So I think Miami there, I don't give them a lot of chances to win. I think Loyola is going to probably take that one against Miami, just especially missing Bruce Brown. If Lonnie Walker steps up and has a really good game for Miami, then maybe they can go out and win it. But they're going to need one of their better offensive performances of the year, and they're going to need to share the ball really well to beat Loyola.
Yeah, I have that matchup as a potential upset in the first round. That's a Loyola Chicago team that went to Florida and beat them. So, that's a very good team. But to close out, some matchup talk here. Two potential huge second and third round matchups here. The first is Arizona versus Kentucky. I just think if that happens in the second round, it's going to be a lot of fun. You're going to have a ton of NBA draft scouts there. DeAndre Ayton, of course, leading Arizona versus Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and the rest of that Kentucky club. It's unfortunate that Jared Vanderbilt doesn't look like he's going to be able to go, because with his athleticism and size, it'd be interesting to watch him go up against DeAndre Ayton. But nonetheless, I think that's going to be a fantastic game. And as well as that, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention my Duke Blue Devils in this live stream. And so round 2, potentially Duke, Michigan State. I mean, sign me up. I'm very excited for the potential of that game. That just looks like a ton of fun.
Yeah, I agree. I think that game could be very well a decider of who gets to the Final Four from the Midwest if both you guys meet up in the Elite Eight.
Yeah,
or in the Sweet 16 rather.
Right, and personally, I think Kansas is the best team in the Midwest. I think both Michigan State and Duke have flaws that Kansas can exploit, but that's why you play the games. And no one this year. I think we're gonna see some. People have compared it to the years that UConn won previously because of the madness that is anticipated, and I think that's fair. And so, it wouldn't surprise me if we have a 3 or a 4 seed going to run here and make the tournament champion.
Yeah, I think this year there isn't a clear number 1 team. I think Virginia maybe should get that just because of how consistent they've been all season, but there really hasn't been one team with
John,
stacked with. Yeah.
With them losing DeAndre Hunter,
right.
That to me, DeAndre Hunter was the difference between the Virginia teams from the previous few years that were very good but didn't go as far as they necessarily should have in the tournament. And without him, they lose that X factor. And therefore, to me, they are just like everyone else.
Yeah, and it opens a window for Villanova, to get back and get a win, or UNC to repeat. But obviously, we're going to see. I don't expect all 4. I don't expect it to be chalk by any means, Jack. I think we're going to see some really big upsets this year, more so than other years, maybe even.
I agree. All right, John.
All right, so let's move on to the NFL draft then.
Yep. So we'll quickly talk about 2 potential picks here. So, John, why don't you start us with what you think the Lions will do at 20?
Yeah, at 20, the Detroit Lions, they have some, they're a solid team. They missed the playoffs last year, but they're a team who year in and year out on the back of Matt Stafford, they're going to be in the hunt. And I think this year they're really going to need to look at just helping Matt Stafford, giving him some more assistance so that it's not so heavily focused on him. They have Darius Slay and Ezekiel Ansah on the defensive side of the ball. If I were the Lions, I would think heavily about taking Darius Geis at 20 overall. Giving them a running back that they haven't had since – they have not had a really good running back. I can't really remember the last time they had someone who really struck fear in defenses. So I think Geis would be that type of guy. And that offensive line has definitely been improved over the last few years. So I think running behind that line with Geis would definitely take some pressure off Matt Stafford. I also wouldn't be surprised to see them beef up the middle of their defense. They did pick A'Shawn Robinson not too long ago. He's been solid, but they could use someone else. I wouldn't be surprised if someone like Maurice Hurst, if he's available, if his heart issues that cropped up at the combine checks out okay, he could be a direction they want to go in. Maybe someone might be a little bit of a reach, but someone like Taven Bryan from Florida, an upfield penetrator could be another potential pick there for them. Or a linebacker, a difference maker like Rashaan Evans could be pretty interesting for the Lions to add another corner to pair with Darius Slay. So they can go in a multitude of different directions. If I were them, though, I would really consider heavily taking Darius Geis.
Yeah, and we've discussed Geis at length here when we compared him and Barkley. And, we both think that there's not as big of a gap between Geis and Barkley as people have made it out to be. And so ultimately, to me, if you're able to get someone like Geis at 20 for the Lions, I think that's a great pick. But going back to the corner position, if you're going to get someone to pair with Darius Slay, I think someone to look at would be Jair Alexander, who's definitely moved up boards after his combine performance, showing teams he's healthy. And, he would be a fantastic pick, a guy who, if he didn't have his injury concerns, would be CB1 on my board.
Yeah, I agree. I think Alexander, if they're satisfied with his medical recheck at the combine, I think he'd be a perfect guy to pair with Darius Slay. He can be a CB2 right away, and I think he'd really thrive in that role, matching up against the second best receiver on teams' rosters.
Yeah, yep, absolutely, John. But moving on now to pick 21, which is the Bengals now after their recent trade to get Cordy Glenn. We already discussed what we thought the Bengals would do, which was target an offensive tackle. So they shored that need up, acquiring Glenn. They could still look to add another guy.
If I were them, I would really think about getting another one just because, Glenn has been a little up and down himself. And at 21, I think that's a really good spot where you can get a guy like Connor Williams, Orlando Brown if they want to go in that direction, or one of the guys who's kind of
Brown
rising.
In the first round.
What's that?
Orlando Brown in the first round still, John?
Oh, I mean, like I said, I don't hate Orlando Brown, and it's going to depend on what the Bengals' evaluation of him is. But him playing right tackle, maybe not as bad.
Yeah,
maybe.
To me, it's funny. To me, it reminds me a little bit of Andre Smith, but I thought Andre Smith was a better athlete.
Okay, fair enough. But, some other guys like Tyrell Crosby, Jamarco Jones, they could be, reasonable picks at 21. Or even, going and replacing Russell Bodine with someone like James Daniels or really probably James Daniels with Billy Price's injury. So, I think they have to go offensive line in Cincinnati just because that defense is pretty solid. And especially hitting big on Carl Lawson and Jordan Willis last year, I don't think they really need to go to defense first round.
Yeah, and I think that the Bengals fans at least are going to be worried if they do draft another offensive tackle with their recent lack of success drafting at that position.
Yeah, if they draft one this year early, they're gonna need to hit on them.
Yeah. I think, it's going to be very tough for their GM to really sell himself if he picks another tackle and that guy fails as well.
And I think it kind of sucks for them because the best offensive lineman really at center and tackle this year, there's really no one who's extremely polished and kind of a guy who's quote unquote safe. I think guard, you probably have more safer guys if they want to go in that direction with players like Isaiah Wynn and Will Hernandez.
Right.
So that could definitely be an option. But otherwise, I think Cincinnati, I think they're going to have to roll a dice on an offensive lineman at 21.
Right. All right, John. So the team that was supposed to be at 21, let's talk about them. They have picked 22. I guess we could talk about the Bills this week. We'll talk about them maybe next week, or we'll move on to the Rams. But I think the Bills, quite frankly, moving on from Tyrod Taylor, while I don't necessarily agree with it, was something that clearly had been in their plans for a couple seasons now. So just for the fact that they decide to act on it is a good sign to me for them moving forward.
Yeah, I agree. I think ultimately they're moving up into 12. I think they're going to try and position themselves for a bigger trade up into the top 5, top 3, and try to get a quarterback. If they don't, and looking at 22, I think that could there's so many holes on this team that they've really gone through a restructure, a rebuild really there in Buffalo. Even though they made the playoffs last year, they got rid of a lot of guys: Robert Woods, Sammy Watkins, Ronald Darby, Preston Brown looks like he's going to be moving on. So there's a lot of guys that are on the move there for Buffalo. At 22, I really think they could go a variety of different ways. I think if there's still some solid cornerbacks on the board, guys like Isaiah Oliver or Mike Hughes, they might look at going and getting one of them, pairing them with Tre'Davious White. They might have bigger needs, though, to be fair. So defensive tackle could be something they look to fill with some of the guys I mentioned for the Lions, Brian and Maurice Hurst, Vita Vea, if he's still there, but I don't think he'll be there at 22. There's just, They could definitely go best player available because in Buffalo, there's no one position that I look at and I say, okay, they're set there. They could use any player at any position, and especially now at tackle with moving on from Cordy Glenn.
Yeah, it's funny because it seemed like they unintentionally made the playoffs last year with a roster
exactly.
that really wasn't really created to make the playoffs. So they surprised themselves, but then clearly they are not taking that success and saying, okay, we only need a few more pieces. They are honestly assessing the roster and saying we really outperformed ourselves, frankly, last season, and we need to build up the talent all over this roster. I thought they started to do a very good job of this before the start of last year, even when they made the trades of Sammy Watkins, and they made another deal as well, which I can't think of it right now. But they brought in more draft picks at the time, and so now they've really started to change their roster around. And although the one thing I will say, John, is I saw reports yesterday of them signing Star Lotulelei, which I thought was rather strange.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I think that would definitely help them with Kyle Williams getting older and then moving on from Marcel Darius. I think that would be a solid pickup for them.
Yeah,
Lotulelei definitely not a difference maker, but a solid player.
Right. The only thing for me is he's expected to sign, a 5-year deal.
Yeah.
And to me, he's 28 years old. He'll be 29 in December. So, he still has a couple seasons left before he hits that age 30 number. Defensive lineman, it's not too much of a concern compared to other positions.
Especially nose tackles.
Right. But still, they had Marcel Darius, who they got rid of last year, who they'd given the big money contract to previously, and then didn't necessarily live up to expectations. With the amount of guys they'd moved out to clear house, it seemed like they were trying to start fresh. And we'll have to see what the details are. All it seems to be 5 years as of now. Haven't seen any details on the dollars. So, I don't know. Just to me, it was an interesting move from them, and I figured we should discuss that.
Yeah, I think if they go ahead with that, it could, allow them to address defensive tackle later on, if at all, instead of in the first round. But, yeah, really, they could go in any direction. I think best player available is the way for them here. One player I'm interested, or I'm kind of surprised they haven't gotten rid of, is LaShawn McCoy, just because if they are going through a true rebuild, why not move him, a veteran guy who can contribute to a playoff team, for more draft picks or more, whatever, and just try to completely start over. But if they do wind up keeping McCoy, I guess running back is really the one position where they don't need to worry about it in the first round. But other than that, absolutely every single position they can go ahead and upgrade it.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely, John. All right. Well, that's it for the 10th episode of Draft Man Standing. We'll catch you guys next Tuesday.